This is a terrible tragedy in New York. Sarah McNally, only 41 and from County Longford, was stabbed to death in a bar.
Yes. So on Saturday evening around 6:30 p.m. American time, emergency services were called to a bar in Queens. It was called the Cayley House, an Irish bar there, and they found Sarah with serious stab wounds to her neck and a male attacker who had stab wounds, I think it was to his back and neck. They were both brought to hospital, but Sarah was pronounced dead very quickly. And then it has since emerged now that the man in custody, he's in custody, but he's also in hospital being treated.
Yeah.
But we have reports today that it is her boyfriend, and he's also suffered serious wounds. There was reports about how she was inside the door in the pub, and this man, according to witnesses, seemed to come in and just randomly attack her. Obviously, he was known to her, but attacked her out of nowhere, and she suffered fatal injuries. And then the police were unable to apprehend him, so they had to taser him. He had also turned a knife on himself. There's reports that he had a knife in his both hands as well.
So terrifying for
So
people in
really
that
terrifying, yeah, absolutely terrifying, because obviously it was a busy bar. She was very well known, very
and it
well
must have happened really quickly that if there was people there that they didn't get the chance to kind of tussle with him or whatever. I'm sure that'll all come out. But
exactly, and I suppose that's what, obviously led to the theory, or led police to deduce that it was somebody known to her, because he seemed to zone in on her straight away. It was a busy bar. And I suppose it is unusual for these kind of incidents where women are known to their attackers for it to happen in such a public place like this. But according to witnesses and according to police sources from US publications, that seems to be the case. And obviously,
so were they living together, herself and her partner?
Yeah, according to reports, she has been living in New York for the last 10 years, so a long time. Some friends didn't seem to know that much of him, but according to reports, they had been living together for a few months. But there's different reports about whether there was any violence in his past, but according to reports, there doesn't seem to have been any issues that it was known of a domestic nature between them before now. So yeah, what we could see was that they've been living together for a number of months, but we did see other reports, and not all friends were aware of the relationship, so I'm not sure how long it had been ongoing or anything like that. But he was known to her anyway. The police are happy with that.
Is it easy to get stuff from the States, like when you're dealing with a story like this breaking on a Sunday? What time was that, our time?
Well, it would have been
close to midnight. It really broke on Sunday,
really
early Sunday on air time. Yeah. I don't think it is. I suppose the information seems to, the way the media is there, it's not as it seems to come out quicker there.
It can be very graphic.
Yeah, and very graphic. Yeah. And in terms of identifying suspects and all that seems to happen quite quickly over there. Obviously, the New York Post are reporting a lot of it as well from police sources and stuff. But in terms of,
and they'd be a reliable publication, obviously,
very reliable publication. And then because she was very well known, she does seem to have made a new life for herself in New York in the last 10 years. But there was a lot of Longford politicians who have spoken on RT News. There was Longford TD who told how Sarah's mother was on her way on Sunday, an awful journey for any parent to have to make. So she was very well known in her area because she worked in hospitality. She was very well known in Longford, having worked in bars. I think she had a civilian role in the Irish prison service before as well. So even though it did happen over there, I suppose there was a lot of news coming out from this side just about the kind of person she was and how shocking it was as well.
Like it sort of adds an extra layer to any of these things when families have to travel, and they're kind of like the thoughts of doing that transatlantic flight with that waiting for you at the other end of it. Now obviously New York would be a friendly place for Irish to come, and there'll be great support for them and all the rest of it, but it just definitely adds another layer of trauma. And then as the investigation continues, then they probably have to bring the remains back to Ireland, and that can take a long time as well.
Well, this is it, and we don't know the condition. There's been various reports that he was in critical condition, but his injuries aren't life-threatening, so obviously the police are waiting for that situation to play out before they can put charges to him. So I don't know how that impacts. Obviously, there'll have to be a post-mortem done on Sarah's body, and travel arrangements. I don't know how that will, I assume that will have an impact on that. So yeah, it's completely awful. It's just a living nightmare for her family, and obviously bringing her body back, it just adds an extra layer of agony and confusion, I'd imagine.
You were saying it was kind of similar to...
No, because just the exact situation you've described there, in I spoke to the family of Denise Morgan, which was only in October, like some very similar circumstances. Denise was 39, and she was living in New York and working in a bar in Queens, and she was actually shot in her home by her American boyfriend in October, and he was eventually found dead beside his weapon. Rather than get into the specifics of how he died, but I mean, they spoke to me. The two sisters spoke in the aftermath. Lisa and Shannon, like just of getting that phone call, then trying to make all those arrangements, which are almost like they're really difficult for people to do at home, but then to not understand all of who to contact. Also, like
charity, I think it's certainly
the Kevin Bell
repatriation fund. They just helped somebody I know recently who also died in tragic circumstances in New York, but to help the family get the body back.
They're a remarkable actual organisation, because it's not something you'd normally think of, but they do provide funding for people who die, but they also help them with the practical arrangements. Like in the case of Denise Morgan, she was shot dead by her boyfriend. And
did the family know him?
But they had met him over the years.
So far away,
the sisters had gone over to her a couple of times over the years. Joe Taveras was his name, and like in the aftermath, he obviously died as well during the incident, and he kind of got this. He was a former US soldier, and he got this kind of glowing memorial about all his good work and all of that, and they found that really, really difficult. That it was obviously put down to mental health and that sort of issue, but they had spoken about how he'd been one of these really, really controlling people with her, always following her. He'd actually constantly been accusing her of cheating, domestic violence occurring, and she'd ultimately found out that he was cheating her at the time, and had signed a lease to move to a new apartment. She had a young child with a previous partner, and at that point that seems to have stamped him, and he killed her, so it's just, that
was a build-up, and of course firearms much easier to get your hands on over there than here. This is a newer relationship. I certainly have contact with one friend of hers who said they didn't really know him from here. They hadn't had a chance to meet him yet.
And that seems to be reports similar to that in America as well. And there was talk that there hadn't been any knowledge of incidents of domestic nature between the two of them. So it obviously, we don't know, you never know what goes on behind closed doors, but that seems to be the case. But the outpouring of grief over there is extraordinary, just from watching CNN. And there was people interviewed outside the pub, and she seems to, I don't think she's been working in that particular pub for an extremely long time, but she seems to have been really, really well gotten by the patrons and by her fellow staff members. And there was
big Irish community in Queens.
Big Irish community, but people referring to her being such a good friend and such a good person. And there wasn't a lot of commentary about the relationship, which would lead us to believe that it was new. But I suppose that unfortunately in these kind of incidents, it always does tend to, not always, but there tends to be a link there when it is somebody known to them to a domestic relationship.
And sometimes they say when those relationships are coming to their end, if somebody's trying to pull out of a relationship, that's a really dangerous time.
Exactly, and I mean that tragically, that certainly in Denise Morgan's case, and it seems in this case as well, both of them are kind of described as so real caring, nice, good people, and that can attract a sort of predatory, bad person as well, men into those relationships,
Well, that's
There's so much of that mental health stuff out there, isn't there, involved in a lot of these cases of violence, but there's just so much of it that has been missed or not treated, or there isn't the services there.
But I mean, certainly in some of these cases, there's a dispute about what is mental health in those circumstances. I mean, there's a lot of people that suffer from mental health in Ireland. I think they say 1 in 4 people get treated for mental health. I mean, very, very, very few of them ever go on to commit a violent act in the course of suffering from that mental health. So is that, certainly Denise Morgan's family spoke in detail about that to me, saying that's not really an excuse. That his mental,
he was
his
a
mental
violent
health
person.
He's a violent, controlling person, and his mental health may have not been great But really, that's nothing to do with anything. It's about coming across controlling people who won't let people get on with their lives. I mean, we don't know.
I sort of meant that not necessarily
No.
an excuse for it, but that there's a lot of untreated mental health out there that results in violence, and that we kind of, you see this sort of, this girl went to work for the day, and the next thing she's, in the flash of violence, she's dead, and her family are left totally bereft. And
that is unusual from cases we've reported on for a domestic relationship, for the violence to be shown in that way. And sometimes you think, can somebody not be in a mental health crisis if they can walk into a pub and stab somebody in the neck? I do get Niall's point as well, that that shouldn't be an excuse for people, that some people just are violent. But yeah, it is a strange one. And even when I was reading stuff today, there seems to be, there's reports that there's no suggestion as to why he took these actions. But then you don't want to also, think, oh, well, it has to be that he had some kind of episode, because maybe, you don't want it to suggest that there was something done.
And we'll probably never find out, because in the
exactly.
States, if he survives, and if there's witnesses to the crime and all the rest of it,
but it is
you kind of get put away for a long time.
It is, and it's a big debate though sometimes in how these things are reported on. And like, we're probably not worth going into specific cases, but we've had a lot of these cases where maybe women have been killed by partners, let's put it that way. And, there's a debate between, is this person, the victims' families sometimes feel that the mental health card is not a sufficient explanation for what happened to them.
Oh.
Where other people, we've seen people, basically kill their families.
But you look at, I've written a book on this.
You did, Nicola.
Murder-suicide, familicide. I actually really strongly feel that the murder of a child is murder, and that you can't, we have in this society anyway, we tend to look on that as a tragedy.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of a family thing, and it's a tragedy. I don't agree with that at all. I mean, these are murders, and sometimes they're not even properly documented as murders, or certainly it doesn't feel that way when people are talking about them or in the narrative.
No. And it's not always men as well. Like,
I was going to say, there's
women,
cases of women who've killed their children. There does tend to be
very few women kill their partners.
Exactly. But there does tend, there's often a mental health element to that, and there's often a sympathetic view on that as well. Yeah,
well, women may sometimes get a more sympathetic hearing, but it's hard to understand how they should be reported. And sometimes, of course, there are organisations in this country that don't want these things reported on at all.
Exactly.
And that can also be a factor as well, that, a degree of healthy debate about these, what feeds into what is necessary in society. And there are organisations that seem to only want it to be discussed in a very minimal or particular way.
And then sometimes families can't cope with it as well, being discussed, and that, somebody's tragedy, their murder, being part of fodder of conversation. Families are horrified by that.
And sometimes I think it doesn't get the right treatment in the media either. I don't know. And sometimes I wonder, or just in the public in general, is there this view of, well, how did they not know? How did they not get out? Because you have for example, the really random murders that thankfully are very rare. For example, Ashton Murphy or Sarah Everard in the UK, which was just triggered an absolute outpouring of public shock and horror. But then when you look at it, we did a story at the weekend about how there was 15,000 incidents of domestic violence reported to Gardaí, Specialist Gardaí in 2023, just in Dublin. So that is the crux of where women are being targeted. It's their domestic instance. They're very rarely random attacks, and you just think, there can be a hysteria when there is one of those very, very tragic random attacks, and people feel it could happen to me, but the chances of that are so slim compared to the chance of that domestic violence happening in your own household. Yeah.
And a lot of these particularly violent incidents are sparked by the fact that the relationship has come to an end, and that control has been lost, and the only way to reassert that control is through this sort of really extreme act of violence,
Well, we'd like to kind of follow this as well, and maybe with some, we'll keep an eye for any, friends or family who have anything to say about Sarah, about her background, about, what sort of a person she was, just to keep her actual memory alive in other ways than this one
Absolutely.
incident which ended her life.
Yeah, well, there's been like family members speaking, and there's been even a colleague that we work with went to school with her and was just talking about how such a wonderful person, even at that age, always friendly, was very involved in sports in school. So, just obviously
Yeah.
a normal, nice girl, and there seems to be particularly warm outpouring of emotion towards it, and people are just shocked, but so I can imagine it's going to continue, and I think there's talk of a public commemoration of some sort in Longford this week as well, so we'll obviously keep an eye on that.
God love her and that family now, and all they have ahead of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's horrendous.
Okay, thanks guys.